A poorly shifting bike can spoil your ride pretty easily. So in this video, I'm going to show you some of the common reasons why a bike may be shifting poorly and how to fix it. Now just a note, I will not be doing a detailed video of how to adjust a rear or front derailleur. I'll link those videos below. One of the most common causes is just the fact that your rear derailleur or front derailleur is out of adjustment. If the rear derailleur is out of adjustment, the chain's going to hesitate shifting into either a bigger cog or a smaller cog. And what happens is the cable inside the housing can get stretched out a little bit and you've got to take out some of that slack. Usually the chain hesitates going to the bigger cog. The way that you would fix this is just to turn your barrel adjusters. If your chain is hesitating going to the larger size cog in the back, you're going to turn it counterclockwise and take up the slack. If it's hesitating going into the smaller size cog, then you're going to add a little bit of slack by turning it clockwise. Turn the barrel adjuster about a quarter turn and then check it and see if it shifts okay. Keep turning it until you get the proper shift. If your derailleur keeps coming out of adjustment, check and make sure the bolt that holds the cable in place is tight enough. If it's not, as you put more tension on the cable, i.e. when you go into the easier gears or bigger cogs in the back, it's going to slip. This does not need to be super tight. It's usually done with a 4 or 5 millimeter Allen wrench or a Torx wrench. This is a SRAM Eagle, so I'm going to use a Torx wrench. I usually do about 5 to 7 Newton meters. Again, not crazy tight, but just make sure it's snug. Something that can cause especially a rear derailleur to shift poorly, and this is commonly overlooked, is a crack in the cable ferrule. Some people call these end caps. This is a little plastic ferrule that goes on the end of your cable. Over time, these cable ferrules can crack, especially if the derailleur cable is at a weird angle. Now this one goes right into the rear derailleur, so this one's probably going to be in good shape for a long time. But if there's a bend, which you'd commonly see on a road bike or a gravel or cyclocross bike, these cable ferrules will kind of develop a crack and the housing will kind of come out the side. And as you shift into a bigger cog or easier gear in the back, the cable is going to move in the ferrule, and that's really going to cause the derailleur to shift poorly. So as you can see on my gravel bike, the angle of the cable coming into the ferrule is a little bit sharper, and so over a long period of time, that ferrule can develop a crack in it. So that's one thing you want to look out for. Another thing that can cause poor shifting is just the fact that the cable inside your housing has become corroded and it's time to change it. So I typically recommend changing your cable and housing about once a year. Maybe less frequently if you don't ride in really wet conditions, or more frequently if you ride in really wet conditions. So if you ride in a lot of mud and rain, maybe about every 6 months, especially the inner wire. So sometimes you can get away with just changing the inner wire, the metal inner wire, as opposed to the entire housing, but I like to change my housing about once a year. Another thing that can cause poor shifting at the very end of the cassette, either all the way down to the smallest cog or all the way up to the biggest cog, is your limit screws. The limit screws do just what they sound like, and that is they limit how far the derailleur can move at the very end of the cassette in either direction. So if your chain hesitates dropping into the smallest cog, let's say, then you're going to have to adjust your limit screws. Now just a note, the limit screws don't affect how the chain behaves in the middle of the cassette. It's only at the extremes, the largest cog or the smallest one. Now I just want to mention, it's very important when you're adjusting your limit screws that you only adjust them just far enough so the chain will drop into the smallest cog or go up into the biggest cog without making any noise. You don't want to go too far. The final thing that I'll mention is turning the limit screw clockwise, in other words tightening it, is going to push the derailleur towards the center. So this is the low limit screw, so if I turn this clockwise, it's going to push the rear derailleur that way. And this limit screw adjusts if the chain will go up on the biggest cog. And again, as I turn this clockwise, it's going to push the chain in towards the middle of the cassette. A common cause of poor shifting for a rear derailleur is a bent derailleur hanger. This is much more common in mountain biking, but it can happen on a road bike after a crash. So the rear derailleur hanger is a replaceable component that is designed to bend instead of your frame bending, and it's a pretty inexpensive replacement as opposed to having to replace your whole frame. Not only can a crash cause a rear derailleur hanger to bend, but also objects such as sticks or rocks hitting your rear derailleur. And this is why, like I said, a bent derailleur hanger is more common on a mountain bike. Now, if a rear derailleur hanger is not bent too much, it can be straightened. It is an alloy, so if it's really bent, you're going to have to replace it. So Park makes a rear derailleur adjustment tool. This is the Park DAG1. Now, most of you are not going to go out and buy one of these, and so if your derailleur hanger is bent, I recommend taking it to the bike shop. With more and more cogs being crammed on cassettes on mountain bikes and even road bikes today, it's really important to have that rear derailleur hanger adjusted perfectly, and that's why this tool is really important. Now, you can use an adjustable wrench like this to adjust the rear derailleur hanger. In both cases, you're going to have to remove the derailleur, but if you use a wrench, you still can't get it perfectly tuned, and so again, that's why I recommend taking your bike to a shop. If you're a mountain biker, I always recommend carrying an extra rear derailleur hanger in your camelback or in your little toolkit, because if you're out on the trail and you bend your rear derailleur, you're probably going to have a really poorly shifting bike. And of course, the worst case scenario is that you break your rear derailleur hanger, which I've had happen, and it happens quickly. And so the only way to keep from walking out of the woods, unless you can try to convert your bike to a single speed, which is really not that easy to do, you got to replace the rear derailleur hanger. The last thing that I want to mention about a bent rear derailleur hanger is the fact that sometimes you can't actually see if your hanger is bent. In other words, you've had an object hit it, knock it out of alignment, but it's hard to see with your eye. So in that case, the common symptom of a bent rear derailleur hanger is the chain will shift really well at one end of the cassette, but when you get to the other, it'll be poorly adjusted. So you'll adjust the rear derailleur cable, and then you'll get it shifting well up here, but when you drop down into these smaller cogs, it'll shift poorly again. Again, that's a common symptom of a bent rear derailleur hanger. Something else that can cause poor shifting is your chain gets stretched out. Now, the actual metal of the plates don't really stretch. It's the holes where the pins are get worn out and the chain elongates. Usually a chain and a cassette will wear together, but if you change it out and then it starts skipping under power on the cassette, you'll know that you waited too long to change your chain. And in that case, you'll either need to put the old chain back on, which I don't recommend, or buy a new cassette so that the chain and the cassette are both new and the chain won't skip on the cassette. A properly adjusted B-limit screw can also affect how your derailleur shifts. The B-limit screw is going to determine how far away from the cassette that the rear derailleur jockey wheel will sit. Now, if you use SRAM Eagle, the B-limit screw adjustment is absolutely crucial, and it's so crucial that SRAM makes a tool that you can use to adjust the B-limit screw. The way that you use this tool is to put the chain in the biggest cog and then hold the tool up to the upper jockey wheel. And it's hard to see in the video, but there's a little outline of the jockey wheel teeth and also the cassette teeth. And you would keep adjusting the B-limit screw until those line up. Now, if you don't have a SRAM Eagle rear derailleur and you don't have that tool, essentially you want to adjust the B screw so that the rear derailleur is not too close to the cassette. If it is, it's going to make kind of a grinding noise. On the same token, you don't want it to be too far away from the cassette because that can cause poor shifting. So basically, kind of just have it back away from the cassette enough so it doesn't make a noise. Now, we've been talking a lot about rear derailleurs, but the same principles apply to a front derailleur. So checking to make sure the cable is not slipping in this bolt that holds it on. Also making sure there is enough tension so it shifts into your bigger chain ring. So if it hesitates going into the big chain ring, you got to put more tension by adjusting the barrel adjuster, and that's typically up by the shifter. Also looking at your limit screws, which are typically at the top of the front derailleur. And something unique to front derailleurs is making sure they're not twisted. In other words, that they're parallel with your chain rings. If you want to adjust the twist of the front derailleur, in other words, making sure it's parallel with your chain rings, put the chain in the smallest chain ring and then slightly loosen this bolt enough so that you can twist the derailleur back and forth. And this is the clamp that goes around the seat tube, and then tighten it up. Some bikes do not have a clamp that goes around the seat tube, but instead they have a braze on, and you would loosen this bolt here, make sure it's straight, and then tighten the bolt back up. So there's an overview of common causes of poor shifting on a bicycle. Like I said at the beginning, it wasn't a really detailed video of how to adjust the front or rear derailleur, but just things to look for. Questions or comments that you have about shifting on a bicycle, go ahead and drop those below. Thanks for watching.